Okay, as well as being the 50th anniversary of the first episode of Doctor Who last week, it was also the 50th anniversary of the assassination of President Kennedy on the 22nd of November 1963. And the purpose of this video is just to look at some of the conspiracy theories surrounding President Kennedy's assassination, and basically to put forward the view of who I think was behind the assassination of Kennedy. Now, central to the conspiracy theories is the idea that, as well as Lee Harvey Oswald being up in the Texas School Book Depository building, shooting out of one of the windows, that there were other assassins dotted around the site. If you don't know the site, Kennedy was shot in his car while driving down a place called Dealey Plaza in Dallas, and basically the book depository building was behind where he was shot, and Oswald was undoubtedly shooting out of the window, but the argument goes that there may have been other assassins planted around the site, particularly on the grassy knoll, one side of the road where the car was travelling. Now, this kind of argument has obviously appeared in loads and loads, umpteen different books, and of course in films like JFK, the Oliver Stone film, which is it is a really good film. However, in my view, just about all of its conclusions are absolutely wrong. As a film and as a piece of entertainment, it's great, but as an argument, I just don't think it works. Now, in terms of these so-called varied assassins, then the eyewitnesses, about 54 eyewitnesses said that they heard 3 shots, or probably 3 shots, coming from the direction of the book depository building. 33 did say that they thought shots were coming from the grassy knoll, and 9 said that they heard shots coming from elsewhere. So if you take those figures, I mean, the majority are saying that they heard the shots coming from the book depository building. Okay, 33 say they heard shots coming from the grassy knoll, but it's a well-known fact that when you have a loud noise like a gunshot going off, it often produces an echo, from buildings around it or from any raised ground, such as a grassy knoll. So it's perfectly possible that people thought that they might have heard something coming from the grassy knoll or from elsewhere, from other buildings, but it was just the echo sound. And in the confusion of it, because it all happened in the matter of a few seconds, if you take into account people mishearing things as well, then it's actually surprising that the majority say that they definitely heard it coming from the book depository, which suggests to me that is the most likely place that the shots came from. Now, what about some of the other arguments then? Well, what about this so-called magic bullet? I mean, if you don't know the story, basically 3 shots are said to have been fired. The first shot missed Kennedy in the car completely. The second shot is the so-called magic bullet, because this is the one that went into Kennedy's back, out of Kennedy's neck, into the person sitting in the front seat in front of him, a man called Governor Connolly, and wounded them both. And Kennedy was there kind of choking because he'd had a bullet through his neck and coughing. When the third bullet comes in, straight through his head and kills him. And people question this second bullet because they use diagrams like the one that I'm going to conjure up now, to basically say that the second bullet couldn't have shot both Kennedy and Governor Connolly because of the way it's going. It seems to be going down into Kennedy, then up through his neck, which is supposedly impossible, and then zigzag around into Governor Connolly and zigzag through him as well in an unnatural way. And the conspiracy theorists say this couldn't have happened, therefore they must have been shot by separate bullets. Well, I mean, the whole thing, their conspiracy argument doesn't make sense. The first reason it doesn't make sense is they're assuming that President Kennedy was sitting upright. For the magic bullet conspiracy theory to work, he has to be sitting upright. But it's much more likely he was leaning over to wave to the crowd. And if he's leaning over, it's perfectly possible for a bullet to go through his back and whoosh, straight out through his neck, as you can see in this second diagram, which is much more likely to have been what had happened. And as for the idea that Governor Connolly was shot from a different direction, well, he clearly is shot through, with the bullet going out, and into him through his back. You wouldn't be able to shoot Connolly from that direction if the bullet was coming from the side on the grassy knoll. So, this so-called magic bullet, it's perfectly plausible that it could have shot them both, gone into Kennedy, out his neck, and then into the one in front, if Kennedy was just leaning forward a bit. And as for the third bullet, the one that went through Kennedy's head, well, again, there are conspiracy theorists who argue that wasn't fired from behind. Well, of course it was, if you only look at the film footage. The film footage of the shooting is called the Zapruder film. And it shows Kennedy kind of leaning forward after being shot by the second bullet. And then you can see that in the next still, his head blows open. That's the third bullet going in. And his head is coming out here at the side and the front. Bits of his skull have been blown up and blood and everything's coming out. That wouldn't have happened if he'd been shot from the side, because the entry wound wouldn't produce that result. You don't shoot someone there and everything blow out backwards. The entry wound isn't what's causing the explosion out, it's the exit wound. What happened is the bullet went through the back of Kennedy's skull and then out at the side front, blowing out chunks of his skull in the process. And that's what you can see on the film. And it happened like you can see on this picture here. And there's only one direction that a bullet like that could have been fired from. Not the side on a grassy knoll, it could only have been fired from behind. And what was directly behind President Kennedy when that bullet was fired? The book depository. It was fired from above and behind. And if that's how the second bullet was fired, from behind, it had to be, to go in the back and out the neck. If the third bullet was fired from behind to go through the skull in that manner and produce those injuries, then where does that leave the grassy knoll theory? Well, if there was anyone on the grassy knoll, they obviously missed, and it's a bit funny that the only bullets that seem to have hit their target were from the direction of the book depository. No, I mean, at the end of the day, the answer to who killed President Kennedy, in my mind, is quite clear. President Kennedy was assassinated by Lee Harvey Oswald from the book depository. And what other evidence is there that Lee Harvey Oswald was guilty? Well, it's a no-brainer. Later on in the same day, he was approached by a policeman, and he shot a policeman dead, evading capture, and then was later apprehended by others. So he is a murderer. He killed a policeman. Why would he kill a policeman for just approaching him if he wasn't guilty? And unlike what you see on the Oliver Stone film, there's no evidence that anyone else assassinated this policeman. It was Lee Harvey Oswald. People saw it. Anything else is just fanciful theorising. And then, so that suggests Oswald was guilty. And then you have this argument, but if Oswald acted alone, why was he assassinated 2 days later by Jack Ruby? As you'll know if you know the story, Oswald was arrested on the 22nd, and that was on a Friday, and then on the Sunday, as he was being moved, a man called Jack Ruby approached, pulled a gun out and shot him dead. So the assassin was assassinated. And that's used as evidence that it's a conspiracy, that they were shooting Oswald to keep him quiet. Well, again, none of this conspiracy stuff makes sense if you actually make an effort to understand the personalities of the two men involved. First of all, if you understand the personality of Oswald, Oswald was someone who had been living in Cuba. He was someone who flirted with communist politics. He had a grudge against President Kennedy because of the Bay of Pigs incident. And basically, Oswald just seized an opportunity. You know, he was working in this book depository. He read in the paper that Kennedy was visiting Dallas, and they actually printed the route that his car would take in the paper for Oswald and people like that to read. So he was just an opportunist, you know, with a massive chip on his shoulder politically, and he seized the chance, and it was just bad luck, you know, that Oswald succeeded. And as for Jack Ruby, well, Jack Ruby was a troubled individual with links to organised crime. His life was a bit of a mess, and you know, he was someone who was a massive attention seeker. And again, he just seized an opportunity to attention seek by killing the assassin of the president. You know, he was it was some, you know, if Jack Ruby was alive today, he'd be the sort of person that'd just be an internet troll. He was an attention seeker. He, you know, he seized an opportunity to do something extreme, just like Lee Harvey Oswald himself. They were actually not that different in terms of character. So it's perfectly possible to understand the motivations of the two people involved. So, you know, I don't believe there was any evidence of any conspiracy. And then people say, well, why were the authorities so shifty about it all? Why was, you know, there evidence that they were, you know, burying documents and trying to kind of cover things up? Well, you have to understand that in the context of the fevered atmosphere of the time. It was the height of the Cold War. The Cuban Missile Crisis was only a year before, in 1962. You know, we were at real risk of nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And, you know, it's a no-brainer. The American authorities thought that this might be the work of a communist conspiracy. They didn't know that it was just Lee Harvey Oswald on his own. You know, he was someone with links to Cuba. They were terrified that this was a communist plot, because if it was a communist plot, this could lead to World War III. So of course things will be covered up. Of course information will be buried, because at the end of the day they want to control the flow of information, because the last thing they want is an explosion of anger. You know, if the evidence did point to a communist plot or an assassination by the Cubans or the Soviet Union. So that's why there is covering up going on. But the idea that it's because he was assassinated by the CIA or the mafia or any of these other fanciful conspiracy theories, it just doesn't match the evidence, and it doesn't match the context of the times. Anyway, thanks for listening.